And so it gives me great pleasure to welcome this week's speaker as Onja Razafindratsima from the UC Berkeley in California. And Onja did her undergraduate degree and master's degree in animal biology, ecology and conservation at the University of Antananarivo in Madagascar. And after that, she did her PhD at Rice University and then did a variety of postdoctoral positions, including at Harvard University. And from January last year, she joined the faculty at UC Berkeley and has just been telling me about the challenges of setting up a new lab and a new faculty position under a time of COVID. So welcome, Onja, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for inviting me today. I see some faces I know, names I know, so I'm very excited to be talking about my research today. I'm going to be talking about Frugivory and seed dispersal and Madagascar and lemurs. So I'm generally interested in a wide range of topics in tropical ecology and conservation, but I've devoted most of my work studying various aspects of lemur ecology in Madagascar's biodiverse rainforest. That includes studying the lemur community ecology to determine the mechanism that shape the coexistence of various species of lemurs across Madagascar. I'm also interested in looking at lemur responses to anthropogenic disturbances, such as the impact of land use and introduced invasive species on their behavior and foraging pattern. And I'm also interested in the mutualistic interactions with plants, specifically as being seed dispersers. And so since a large proportion of my research has been focused on this third topic, I'm going to focus my talk today on that. And I'm particularly interested in the roles and impact of seed dispersal services by lemur frugivores because it has both ecological and conservation significance. So I'm going to present my research in the light of these two main aspects. In terms of ecological significance, seed dispersal is an important process in plant life cycles. It can influence plant population dynamics because the seeds are transported away from the vicinity of a parent plant where competition among siblings might be high. And it can also allow the plants to reach and colonize new habitats. So in that sense, seed dispersal can ensure the long-term survival of the plant species and can have some impact on ecosystem functioning and the maintenance of biodiversity as a whole. It can also affect the maintenance of diversity within a plant community because the seeds that fall to the ground, known as the seed rain, form an initial template from which the plant community will develop in the future. So in fact, seed dispersal determines the pattern of the spatial pattern of the plants, which may influence their interactions with other plant species, either through competition or through facilitation, as well as their interaction with natural enemies and abiotic factors. And all of that would influence our plant community composition and diversity because all of that would be affecting the survival of the plants. And in many ecosystems around the world, the majority of plants rely on animals for seed dispersal. But this is especially the case in the tropics, like the case of Madagascar. In the tropics, where up to 90% of tree species rely on vertebrates for seed dispersal. And one of the main characteristics of seed dispersal by animals is that it could be biased towards certain areas because the animals forage and use the habitat in a very non-random way. So as an example, I'm showing here the case of this lemur species, Lemur France. They tend to turn back to their previous location. So gonna use this little pointer here. So like they start there in the morning and they may end up here in the evening, but they're always like following that path. They will go back to the same tree over and over and over. And they also backtrack often. So backtrack means that instead of going straight, they will go back to the where they ate previously most of the time. And so basically, they repeatedly use the same route within their habitat, and then they frequently use this, certain trees for foraging and for sleeping. And so by doing that, they may deposit seeds into these frequently used areas. And this non-random biased dispersal of seeds could be critical for some plant species because they may reach various microhabitats that are suitable for their germination. And so it can also promote species coexistence and the maintenance of plant diversity because it may influence the recruitment success by limiting the frequency and diversity of heterospecific interactions between the dispersed seed and the neighbor and its interaction with a biotic environment as well. So with all of that in mind, my research seeks to understand the impact of seed dispersal by lemur frugivores on tree populations and communities. I conduct most of my research at Ranmafana National Park, which is an evergreen mountain rainforest in the southeastern part of Madagascar. Ranmafan is home to more than 400 different species of trees and large shrubs, and it has a research station that provides some logistical support for researchers. And I've mostly collected data in these 4 localities in Ranmafan, in the southern part of Ranmafan. This could be like reached through hike of 1 hour to 2 days from the station. And the reason I'm really interested in seed dispersal by lemurs is because the majority of plants in Madagascar have traits that are adapted for seed dispersal by vertebrates and mostly by lemurs. So for example, the case of Ranmafana National Park, up to 87% of the trees and large shrubs are dispersed by vertebrates. And the majority of these vertebrate dispersed species are primarily dispersed by lemurs. So I've been conducting research on these 3 lemur species, Lemur rufifrons that I mentioned earlier, Lemur preventer, and Pharesia variegata editorum. And these are among the largest frugivores in Madagascar. And like many frugivores, these lemur species disperse seeds via defecation, a concept known as endozoochory. And they are able to disperse the seeds of many plant species with a wide range of size, from the small ones to the large ones. So as you can see here as example, I have here the small seeds of strawberry guavas from the feces of Lemur preventer, and the large seeds of Clerodendron pitchinoides from the feces of Pharesia. So I'm using my finger as a scale here. But being the largest frugivores in Madagascar, these lemurs are the primary responsible for the dispersal of the large seeded ones. And previous studies have shown that the seeds defecated by these lemurs and other lemur species as well had higher germination rate than the non-defecated seeds. It can go up to 80% of germination. And before I go into details about the research, I want to acknowledge that I work with a team of field guide and research technicians who are very familiar with the local fauna and flora. And none of the work that I've done so far have been possible without their knowledge. They can literally identify every tree just by smelling the bark or something like that. And so here are some pictures of the field team I have had over the years. So the first point I will talk about is the impact of non-random dispersal of seeds by the lemur frugivores on plant population. At the population level, we can look at the effect on plant recruitment, specifically how many of the dispersed seeds will survive to become seedlings and how many of these seedlings will survive to become adult. The primary advantage of seed dispersal by frugivores on recruitment is that the seeds can escape the distance and density dependent mortality of being under a parent tree. And this is widely known as the Jensen-Connell hypothesis. So as explained by this graph, seedling survival increases with distance from parent tree and with decreasing densities of sibling. But the non-random movement of seeds into microhabitat that are suitable for their germination could also be critical for seeds that escape this effect. So for example, landing in gaps might be good for plant species that depend on lights to germinate and survive. And so for this directed dispersal to be an adaptive strategies for plants that are dispersed by animals, the advantage of dispersal into this specific microhabitat should be higher than expected under the random dispersal. And also this directed dispersal could be an adaptive, a selective adaptive advantage for plants with multiple partners, so with multiple frugivores dispersing them. If the fruit traits that attract seed dispersion and like certain foraging behavior, habitat preference, or probabilistic pattern of dispersal that will favor recruitment. Or if one or few of the dominant dispersers provide advantage of dispersal. So to address that first question on the impact of non-random seed dispersal on plant population, I parameterized probability recruitment models using data from observation of seed dispersal pattern and data on how this pattern of seed dispersal influenced seedling recruitment. So I focused this part of my research on one plant species that is dispersed by this free lemur species, Cryptocarya crassifolia, which is a long-lived canopy tree with large-sized seeds. So to get the information on where do lemurs disperse the seeds of Cryptocarya, we followed 8 groups of each one of the free lemur species for a year, and then monitored their location and conducted continuous observation of their feeding on fruits and their defecation. So for each time they defecate, we identified the seed species within their feces and then recorded the identity of the adult tree that is near where the seed landed. So this will give us information on whether the seed landed near a conspecific or a heterospecific tree. And we also recorded the canopy cover of the microhabitat where the seed landed. And we categorized those as gaps, medium shaded, and shaded areas as well. And to get an information on the advantage of dispersal through non-random pattern, we also compared the observed pattern of seed dispersal with random expectations. And so the random expectations were based on data from surveys of tree abundances in the habitat and surveys of the availability of each microhabitat category in the lemur habitat. And as a result to this pattern of seed dispersal, we found that the free lemur species non-randomly deposit seeds in various types of microhabitat. So the graph I'm showing here represents the dispersal events by the free lemur species relative to distribution of the free type of microhabitat with different canopy cover. So again, we have the gap, medium shaded, and shaded cover. And so it is based on the proportion of dispersal events that occur in each microhabitat type relative to the proportion of the microhabitat available in the territory of each lemur group. So Using that information, 0 would mean that they disperse seeds randomly, and positive value would mean that they are depositing seeds in that habitat more than you would expect by chance. And negative value mean that they avoid that particular habitat more than you would expect by chance. So as you can see here, the two lemurs prefer depositing seeds in gap, but it was not the case for Varisia. And the free lemur species prefer dispersing seeds into medium shaded, and they all disperse seeds into the shaded area less than what you would expect by chance. And regarding the dispersal of seeds on the adult conspecific, we found that Lemur refifrans is the only species that bias seed dispersal near conspecific adult trees. So as you can see on this graph here, so this is Lemur refifrans, the proportion of dispersal events by Lemur refifrans under cryptocarya trees was more than what you would expect given the abundance of cryptocarya in the habitat. But for the other two species, dispersal under conspecific was not different from expected. The second point is, how do this pattern influence the recruitment of cryptocarya? So to get that info, we conducted an experiment on seed survival and recruitment across the different microhabitat types. So we planted seeds under each one of the category. We first put them in cages, and then the cages were removed after 3 months, and we let the experiment run for 3 years. And as a result of that experiment, we found higher sapling recruitment in gaps, as shown in blue here. And even when we are controlling for canopy cover, we also found that the recruitment was lower near conspecific versus heterospecific tree. So this was the case for 1 year seedling and 3 year saplings as well. So as I mentioned earlier, we then use this information on seed dispersal pattern and sapling recruitment to parameterize the probability recruitment models to assess the relative contribution of each disperser to 3-year recruitment of the host plants. So I'm not going into much detail about the model, but we can discuss that later if you'd like to. So first, we run the model under 2 scenarios. The first one is non-random dispersal by each and all of the 3 lemur species. And then the second one is random dispersal, meaning that the probability of dispersal is based on the availability of each microhabitat category in the forest. And so comparing the outcomes of non-random dispersal with random dispersal can give us some information about the relative contribution of each disperser to the recruitment of the cryptocarya, and also the net benefits of the non-random dispersal. We also compare the outcome of the non-random dispersal with that of no dispersal, so meaning that all the seeds will fall under the parent tree. And so this will give us information on how the absence of these lemur frugivores may affect the recruitment of the plant species that they disperse. So as a result, we first found that the seeds dispersed by the free lemur species had similar recruitment. So these are the probability of recruitment per seed for each one of the lemur species. But then when we compare with the random, so the random are being shown here, when we compare with that, there are some differences. So the seeds dispersed by lemur preventer did better when compared to seeds dispersed on the random dispersal. So as you can see here, lemur preventer, sorry, I moved that away. As you can see, the lemur preventer provided higher recruitment than random dispersal. This is because, as you've seen earlier, they have a strong tendency of dispersing seeds into gaps where recruitment was high. But for Lemurifera, even though they also disperse seeds in gaps, they bias dispersal under conspecific trees where the recruitment was low, and that resulted in lower recruitment probabilities for the plants that were dispersed compared to random. And for Varisia variegata, since they did not bias seeds into gaps where recruitment is high, but towards medium shaded habitat where recruitment was somehow low, the seeds that were dispersed by them were estimated to have lower recruitment than if dispersal was random. So as a group, these lemurs do not contribute to a directed dispersal advantage to the plant in the sense that their combined effect was lower than if the total number of lemur dispersed seeds were instead distributed randomly in the environment. But like looking at individual, we can see that Lemuri preventer had higher effect. But then putting all of the non-random dispersal together as one single graph here and comparing with no dispersal, we found an estimated 4-fold higher recruitment probabilities for seeds that were dispersed by lemur than seeds that fall under the scenario of no dispersal, where the seeds would simply fall under the parent plant. So as a summary of the main finding of that first point, we found that seed dispersal by frugivores were distributed randomly across microhabitat with different canopy covers. And this directed dispersal influenced the recruitment of Cryptocarya crassifolia in such a way that it was higher for the seeds non-randomly dispersed by lemurs than seeds that fall under the parent tree. And finally, the free lemur species differ in their contribution to plant recruitment, which means that looking at the net effect of multiple dispersers rather than single species of dispersers is very important to understand the benefits for the plant species at the population level. The next point I will talk about is the impact of non-random dispersal of seeds at the community level. So one way that seed dispersal by frugivores may impact plants in a community context is that by biasing seed dispersal near certain adult plant species in the landscape, for example, under certain fruiting trees. So in fact, since frugivores tend to spend a large proportion of their time foraging for fruits and then hanging around fruiting trees and may have a tendency to defecate while they're feeding or between feeding pods, they may bias seed dispersal near fruiting trees where they recently fed. And so this is the case for many seed dispersing frugivores. And such behavior could result in non-random association between the dispersed seeds and the adult neighbor. So for example, if let's say these two plant species are fruiting at the same time and they have the same seed disperser dispersing their seeds could be dispersed under each other because the frugivore will be eating on one plant species and then defecating next to another plant species. So that end up as like the seeds of these co-fruiting species could be dispersed under each other. And this could be critical because the spatial proximities influence the interactions of seeds with the adult. The proximity of the seeds with other plants could influence its interactions with both biotic and abiotic environment, as well as its survival and recruitment success. In fact, this spatial pattern of seed dispersal determines what adult neighbor interact with the seed. And this is important because even if the seed escapes the proximity of being a parent or a conspecific tree, and then it lands in a potentially suitable microhabitat, the identity of its neighbor may also affect its survival, and eventually it may affect the establishment of the seedling. One of the reasons that the identity of adult may influence seedling establishment is because of phylogenetic relatedness. So the probability of seedling establishment may be predicted by the phylogenetic relatedness between the seeds and the adult neighbor, whether the seeds are dispersed under a phylogenetically close or distant relative adult tree, because closely related species tend to have similar traits that are associated with certain biotic and abiotic factors as well. So for this part, we examined how the non-random pattern of the seed dispersal that is driven by the attraction of the lemur frugivores to these fruiting trees influence the phylogenetic relatedness between the seeds that they disperse and the adult neighbor where the seed just landed. And so to address this question, we use data on whether the seeds land near fruiting trees based on our observation, and we analyzed the phylogenetic relationship between the dispersed seed and the fruiting adult neighbor. So to get the data on where the seeds land, we recorded the fruiting status of the adult neighbor to where the seeds were deposited during the lemur observations that I mentioned earlier. So when we follow the lemurs and then watch what they eat, where they defecate, and then when they defecate, we also take information of the fruiting status of the tree that is next to it. And we also conducted indirect observation of seed dispersal using seed traps that looked like little white basket that we hung on lemur food trees. And so we monitored these traps every 2 weeks for 16 months to look at the content. And then we identify seeds in the lemur species and the fruiting status of the trees that have the crown overhanging each one of the traps. And in the same as with before, we compared this observed pattern of seed dispersal with random expectations based on data from surveys of tree abundances in the habitat of the lemur and monitoring of fruiting phenology of more than 3,000 individual trees in the forest for 2 years. This was about 153 different species of trees. So as a result of our direct observation of seed dispersal, the pattern showed that lemurs commonly deposit seeds at their feeding trees. So as you can see on this graph here, the y-axis corresponds to the mean percentage of seed dispersal near fruiting trees as compared to random expectation. And you can see that all 3 lemur species tend to deposit seeds near the feeding trees. So the observed is in the orange one here. So they tend to deposit seeds near the feeding trees upon which they recently fed, more than what you would expect by chance. And even with the indirect observation where we use the seed traps, we also found the similar pattern. So the data from seed traps also show that the lemurs bias seed fall under trees that are fruiting. So as you can see this figure here that showed the rate of seed dispersal by lemurs into a seed trap. And it shows that it was higher if there was a lemur feeding tree species with fruits above that is overhanging the seed traps as well. So now that we know that the seeds land near fruiting trees, the second point to look at is the phylogenetic relationship between the dispersed seed and the fruiting adult neighbor. And so to do that, I built a regional phylogenetic tree that contained all the known tree species in Ranmafan. So using an existing megatree of angiosperm, we did that. And then we used to use that to measure an index of phylogenetic relatedness relative to null expectation called NGI, nearest taxa index. So this index measures the phylogenetic distance between the seed and the adult, and then compare that with a mean phylogenetic distance from random pairs of seed and adult that were randomly selected from a seed pool and an adult pool, species pool. So as a result, this graph here that I'm going to explain shows the estimated phylogenetic relativeness between the dispersed seed and its adult neighbor. So a positive value would mean that they are more closely related than expected by chance. And a negative value would mean that they are more distantly related than expected by chance. And so value near zero means that the two species are no more or less related than expected by chance. So basically, what we found was the pattern of phylogenetic relationship between the lemur dispersed seed and the adult neighbor was not different than expected by chance, as you can see here. And even though the NTI, the average NTI for the seeds dispersed by Varicea was low, so you can see here, it was not significant either. So it was not different from what you would expect by chance. But this pattern may vary over time because of temporal variation in the timing of fruiting, meaning that some species might be fruiting in some months, but not the other. So the phylogenetic structure of the species that are fruiting at the same month may be reflected in the phylogenetic relationship between the dispersed seed and the adults. So to take that temporal variation into account, we also looked at how this relationship vary over time. So taking that temporal approach, we found that the phylogenetic relationship between seeds and the adult neighbor fluctuated between clustered and over-dispersed over time. And this non-random association in the phylogenetic relationship was more obvious in 9 out of the 16 months, such as that in some months, the seeds ended up near closely related adult trees when expected by chance. And in other months, the seeds were deposited near distantly related adult trees. So one of the reasons we might see this fluctuating pattern, as explained earlier, is that the phylogenetic structure of the co-fruiting plants may vary through time. So like, as I said, the species that are fruiting at the same time may be more closely related by chance. So that's why you have the seeds being dispersed and they're more closely related by chance as well. So this non-random pattern for the seeds that is dispersed in the same habitat as a co-fruiting close relative could mean that the seed might thrive because it has the similar traits to tolerate the habitat. On the other hand, it could also face similar natural enemies as the adult species. So it may have the same pathogens or the same seed predator, so it may not survive. But this is a future areas that I would like to explore more to look at the implication of these seeds being dispersed under these different phylogenetically related species. So as a summary of this second part, we found that by using fruiting trees as seed dispersal foci, the lemur frugivore structured the early stage interactions of seeds and the adult trees. And that resulted in biased pattern of phylogenetic relatedness of the seed-tree association, which is crucial for seed establishment and survival. And so if this biased pattern of dispersal is common, the frugivores might promote tree coexistence in biodiverse forests by limiting the frequency and diversity of heterospecific interactions of the seeds that they disperse. So basically, the non-random dispersal of seeds by these lemur frugivores had some impact on plants at both the population and the community levels. And given such important role, their loss could have some cascading impact on the ecosystem. So the last point I will talk about is the consequence of losing lemur seed dispersers. This topic is important because about 96% of the extant lemur species are currently threatened to extinction, making them one of the most threatened mammal groups on Earth. The three lemur species focus of my research are categorized as vulnerable and critically endangered, with population decreasing. This is last year's assessment. And since the seed dispersal service can have critical impact on the demography of the plants that they interact with, as we've seen earlier, losing these lemurs can affect the structure and regeneration pattern in the forest. It could also lead to further biodiversity loss because other taxa also rely on the plants for their survival. And also, the loss of these lemur frugivores can also hinder the ability of the forest to provide vital goods and services to human society. As an example to that, in a study where we simulated the changes in carbon storage of a tree community in the face of losing these lemur frugivores, we found declines in the forest potential to store carbon. So as you can see on the graph on the left here. So for this, we simulated the loss of frugivores by removing trees that are dispersed by these lemur frugivores and then replacing them with the remaining trees. And so the percentage of change in the above ground carbon decreased as the percentage of the lemur dispersed trees removed and replaced increased. The main reason for this is because there is a strong relationship between seed size and plant traits that are related to carbon storage. So as you can see on this graph here, seed size is positively associated with wood density and trunk diameter, regardless of the dispersal mode. And so this suggests that the large seeded trees have high above ground biomass in this system specifically. But what's even more interesting is that the large seeded species with high wood density diameter are lemur dispersed. So as you can see here with the blue ones, with the large seeded plant species are all lemur dispersed with the blue ones here. And this pattern of decline in carbon storage that we found for this system in Madagascar is similar to what was also observed in other systems across the tropics, especially for the ecosystem in Tanzania and Cameroon, where the large seeded trees also tend to have a bigger volume and higher root density than small seeded trees, and also like the seeds that are dispersed by abiotic means. So to summarize all the points I presented so far, we can conclude that the foraging behavior of the lemur frugivore influenced the spatial, temporal, and phylogenetic pattern of seed dispersal. And this pattern can have positive impact on plant diversity, species coexistence, and ecosystem function. So losing these lemur frugivores can have negative impact on the plants and the forest ecosystem as a whole at multiple scales. And so that's what I've been doing in the past few years, but there are still a lot of questions to look at regarding the role and impact of lemur frugivores at seed dispersers, as well as the potential impact of their loss. So my lab is still working on this topic and trying to answer various questions related to that. So I'm just gonna give you some example ideas of like what I've been working on and what I'm working on now. One of my current projects in this regard is investigating the dispersal mechanism of orphan plants. The term orphan in this case simply means that the plant does not have an extant seed disperser, probably because its primary disperser may be extinct, or maybe its geographic distribution does not overlap with the geographic distribution of its dispersers. So This is, for example, the case for Canarium and Adansonia, which are some of the focus of the research we're doing right now. Canarium is a tree species with large seeds that are only dispersed by large frugivores, such as the large-bodied ruffed lemurs in Madagascar. And its geographic range does not always overlap with that of its disperser. So in some location, it could be considered as an orphan plant. Adansonia, the baobab trees in Madagascar, they have large seeds as well, and the dispersers went extinct in the Holocene era, and we don't know. We currently do not know the current dispersers as well. So there are actually about 487 plant species in Madagascar that suffer from local extinction of their suitable primary disperser. So being an orphan is critical for the plant because, as I've shown earlier, seed dispersal is critical for the survival and long-term persistence of the plant species. So without the disperser present, what mechanism would allow them to persist, or they doomed to extinction and just waiting for that time to arrive? And what allows them, what dispersal mechanism they have, given that they don't have the dispersers. And so I'm testing a few hypotheses. We're testing a few hypotheses to determine the dispersal mechanism, including the importance of rodents in dispersal of seeds on the ground and the role of abiotic factors like wind and water runoff during cyclone season, and various hypotheses in that sense to look at this dispersal mechanism. We've also started looking at the role and impact of nocturnal mouse lemurs that are small size and omnivores. So as you've seen, I've shown with my talk today, like most of my work has been on the large size and diurnal lemur frugivores. And it's like oftentimes also the roles of omnivorous and nocturnal individuals in seed dispersal is usually less studied than that of frugivores and dispersal species, diurnal species. So we're trying to fill that gap in knowledge. And so we've been starting working on that, especially my PhD student, Feru Ramanandat, is working on the seed dispersal by Microcipius rufus. So with that, there are a couple of people I would like to thank for helping with the work, supporting with many aspects of the work, as well as like founders that supported the work as well. And to really end this talk and take the questions from you, since I bore you with too many lemur pictures, I'm just gonna put this at the end, this cute picture of a tenrec that I also took in one of my field sites in Madagascar. And thank you.
Thank you, Onja. Really, really lovely. And I think you can never be bored by lemur pictures, so I can't be anyway. But 10 Rick's a nice bonus as well. Okay, if you stop sharing your screen, we can open up to questions. And there's a few in the chat. So with the questions, I'll invite you to directly unmute and also yeah, do switch on your cameras. It's nice to have faces in the audience rather than names if possible. So do switch on your cameras if you can. And I'll invite you to unmute and directly ask your question if you can. And if you can't for any reason, just let me know and I'll do it. So Maria, you have a question? Do you want to pose it? Are you there? Maria Vorontsova? I can.
Hi, yep. Is this working?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Hi, Onja, can you see and hear me okay? Apologies for the tech. Thank you so much for your talk. And I also very much enjoyed your talks back at ATBC in Madagascar. I work in Kew Gardens and we work with plants, and I specifically work with grasses. Animals are a very different world for me, and I wanted to ask you about the knowledge gaps. And my understanding is that lemurs are better known than other animals. So do you think we understand these dispersal patterns across Madagascar, or if not, where are the biggest gaps in our knowledge?
That's a good question. Oh, you're talking about like seed dispersal by animals in general in Madagascar, right?
Or
Yeah.
even all seed dispersal, animals or not?
So yes, so you're right. Seed dispersal by animals is better studied than any other species taxa in Madagascar. There are just a handful of studies looking at seed dispersal by birds and bats, but I think the main, so that would be the gaps, is actually like looking at the dispersal of other frugivores in Madagascar. That would be the main gaps that needs to be studied more and like focused on more. The main, and especially also the small lemurs as well. Most of the plant species, so based on traits, like looking at the traits, most of the plant species that are dispersed by these large lemurs of the large seeded ones, also including smaller ones. So if we're like looking at the small seeded plant species, we really have a gap in how birds and lemurs differ in their contribution in dispersal in that sense. I don't know if that answers your question very well.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, I'll pitch in a question. In one of your early figures, you showed that the effect of being dispersed by a lemur compared to just the establishing an underneath the mother tree, that there was a much higher rate of success. How do you differentiate between what could be a Jansen-Connell type effect or the effect of just passing through the gut of a lemur, somehow stimulating germination? And is there a way of separating those two effects?
That's a very good question. A good question. I haven't looked at like separating the effect because so for the experiment we didn't use the seeds that were from lemur feces, but we used seeds that we were like manually extracted from the fruits and then planted them in this different microhabitat where the lemurs would deposit them. So we didn't take into account the effect of lemur gut, but that would be interesting to look at. And
from your knowledge, is there likely to be an effect?
Yeah, so they increase the germination of seeds. Like by the seeds that pass through the gut have higher germination rate than the seeds that do not.
Great, thank you. Okay, Jed, you had a question.
Yeah, so I'm Jedediah Brody at the University of Montana. Thank you so much. That was super fun talk, and it's some fascinating research you're doing. I'm really interested in the seed dispersal effectiveness of the lemurs, both on their own and in a community context. And so what I'm wondering is, there was one of the three lemurs, I think it was one of the eulemur species. It disproportionately dispersed seeds under conspecifics.
Yeah.
It was probably not a very good seed disperser. So if that was the only seed disperser in the system, I think we would all say it's a mutualist, so it's helping the tree. But given that there are other potentially better seed dispersers in the system, and that this species is taking fruits away from them, I'm wondering if you could effectively consider it a parasite.
That's a very good question too. But wouldn't they still like it's still able to disperse seeds away? So if you, I'm not sure how to explain my thought in this sense. That makes sense. Like you just look at that, they may be like parasite, but not really, because they are still having impact on the plants in some ways. So because like if you're thinking about like what's beneficial for the plant is being dispersed and they are able to germinate somewhere. So even if they are doing it in a small proportion, I think that will still be important in that sense. I don't know if that makes sense what I'm trying to say. It does make sense in my head, but I'm having a hard time explaining it. So what I'm like really trying to say, the species is still able to disperse the seed, and if the seed is still able to germinate and become an adult, that will still be a positive impact in that sense. But looking at like taking away seeds from fruits from other frugivores, that may be like a competition with the frugivores, not a parasitism per se. That's how I would see it. I don't know if other people can.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, Elena, you had a couple of questions there. Do you want to pose one and then the other one?
Yes, thank you very much. I really, really enjoyed your talk, and your research is really, really excellent. And I just had just a couple of questions. So the first one is, did you find any evidence of latrine behavior in any of the 3 species, or even maybe sequential defecation? So basically one individual defecating and then another one and then another one from the same place into the same area.
No, we didn't see any latrine behavior in these 3 lemur species. I know some other lemur species do that, but not these 3 lemur species.
This is last because I've seen it in Lemur colaris, but I haven't studied it specifically. So I just wanted to connect those two. Thank you. That's very good to know. And then my other question is a bit more anthropological. So basically, the forests where you work, do the local people that live nearby or within these forests, are they allowed or are they able to use the plants as well? So either to harvest as timber or construction material for any other purpose, or collect medicinal plants or firewood, so dead wood essentially. And if you know if this is the case, if any of these species are also eaten by the lemurs that you study, and potentially if the fruit is eaten in those cases. It's a bit of a long question. I'm sorry.
The forest, the Ranmafan is a national park. It's a protected area, so people are not allowed to use it. It's only for the people using it for tourism and research, but not the local people using. There are some part of the Ranmafan that can be used by the local communities, but not the one I'm doing my research on.
Okay, so they're completely closed off to the people then.
Yeah.
Okay, that's very interesting. Okay, good. Then that settles my question. I just wanted to comment on a previous question from Yadvinder about the lemur defecation. That something I've seen in my research, but I haven't studied specifically again, is that when seeds are passed through the gut of a lemur again, what we found is that they are not predated by rats, either native species or the introduced or invasive species, but we don't have enough data to kind of publish yet. But we did see on camera traps that they always go for viable seeds, but never for these defecated ones. So it's something that I would like to also see more research on, because we also had kind of cages and tables above, so these seeds were not rained on, so they didn't become cleaned, sort of, so that maybe manipulate the result. But I think just in this very early stage of post-defecation, I think it could protect the seeds, and then whether that's enough for them to actually germinate, then that's another question. But thank you so much. It was a really interesting talk, and I really enjoyed it in research, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your insight. Very interesting. Okay, Pierre Michel, you have a question? You're struggling with the microphone. Is the unmute button?
Yeah, I'm on now. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Onja. Nice to see all the people from time to time here with OCTF web seminar.
Nice to see you too.
Yeah. I have 2 questions in one, finally, more or less. I reread rapidly your paper, your 2015 paper, and just checking for the study period. You work between June and you work between March and October when the tree is fruiting, and this overlap with the dry season. So part of my question is, do you think that your result about the difference in seed dispersal, non-random or random dispersal, might be affected by the fact that in a dry season you have less resources and less diversity in the forest? And along with that, are the differences you observe between lemurs, in fact, due to a difference in their diet, some being bigger or smaller than the other and having a different attraction to the fruiting tree, and then definitely have a different effect on seed dispersal?
Yes. Yeah, to answer your question about the season, there could be effect on the different time of the year that the research is conducted. That's why in some case I'm taking temporal approach to look at my result, at the result, because something that we would see during the dry season would be very different during this wet season. Most of the case where I'm doing some of my research during the dry season because that's the only available time, logistically speaking, in academia for me. But we've also doing some long-term research where we're looking at the whole year to encompass that different season as well. And yes, and like the for the second question in the like difference in diet and attraction of the lemurs to the food increase, it could be a reason. We haven't looked at like the specific difference in the behavior and the diet of the lemur species, but mostly they also overlap in the diet. They eat the similar plant species, they interact with similar plant species. So there might not be like very big difference in how the attraction to this food increase would be. And also they're similar in size, so they will be interacting with the large seeded plant species as well, because they're able to disperse those.
Thank you very much. Yeah, great. And just to complement, Yavinder, if I can, about the relativeness that is greater, it appears to be during the wet seasons when you expect more species that are alike from the same phylogeny to be fruiting. So that could be also related to fruiting phylogeny.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you for this very nice presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yavinder.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Natalie, you have a question?
So, hi there.
Hi.
Yeah. So I am from the International Foundation for Science that has been mentioned by Onja. That's a foundation supporting young scientists in developing countries. Yeah, for the others, just to know. Onja, so the results show that action should be taken right now. That's urgent. We cannot really just discuss. So I'm really wondering, did you have any chance to go and talk with policymakers in Madagascar about this?
That's a good point. I haven't had a chance to talk to policymakers in Madagascar directly, but every time I do research, I submit a report in French and in Malagasy to the forest managers, so they are aware of what the result are. So instead of like just publishing my research and send for the scientific community, I also submit a report that they can understand, that I'm hoping will be useful.
Yeah, okay. Okay, can I just give you an advice?
Yes.
It will be a very long way, and you are very credible. You know that policymakers, they also call on who is this girl? Is she credible? You have lots of publication, and I can share with you, instead of talking with this director manager, I knocked on the doors of ministers and others. I can tell you, and dare to do that. Well, I am from there, I had the same profile as you are, dare to go there. And then when you do that, the others will take you in account, and then you say, let's set up the policy. I can assure you, you can contact me later on if you want to. But this is really the way we did. Otherwise, nothing is happening. You can just talk, and then it's very urgent when I listen to your results. They are very interesting. And also they lead to the fact that we need to take action. You said 97% of these lemurs are threatened. Did you say that? That's very serious. And then they play such a big role, you see? So that's why I was really, okay. But that's a very interesting. Yeah?
Okay,
thank you.
Yes, thank you. And thank you.
So that's for me. I'm done.
Thank you very much. Very important point. Okay, does anybody have any more questions? There's nothing more in the chat box. Feel free to just unmute and ask one if you have one that you'd like to ask. Okay, I'll ask another one then. So the point that you got towards the end of your talk, I think was very important to this idea of what actually happens to orphan species. And you showed that these modeling studies that show that if you remove lemur dispersed species and replace them with others, you get a decrease in biomass and all these things. But I guess the key question there is to what extent that actually happens. Do trees that lose one of their primary dispersers disappear from a system, or do they linger? And obviously this is research you're doing now, but I wonder what sense you get from your research, or maybe from work elsewhere in the tropics where people have looked at the effect of the megafaunal extinctions in South America, for example, on species, whether it is likely that these species decline substantially on the time scale of a century or two, or whether they actually linger for much, much longer when the primary dispersers have gone. It's an open-ended question. I'm not expecting a...
Yeah. I don't know the answer. Like, I don't know how long it will take for the plants to actually disappear. So the simulation I did was really like removing the trees, but like the time scale that may happen, we don't have the answer for that to be like make an accurate estimate of like when that will happen exactly.
I wonder if others in the audience, like Pierre
yeah.
Michel, think about dispersal, whether you have any thoughts about what the timescales that these operate at, if they operate at all, or whether there's compensation by other dispersers or
Hi, so my name is Laura. Thank you, Onja, for your presentation. I work right now on a similar project with palm trees in Madagascar. So we're also looking at palm trees with big fruits, and we'll compare with palm trees with small fruits, and we're going to look into genetics. And this is a good question because I've also seen that, for example, I work with two species in the West, Bismarckia nobilis and Hyphini coriacea. I don't know if you know them, but they are everywhere, actually. And they don't really have a known disperser, but I still have really big populations. So I sometimes wonder the same as you do. So
yeah,
I think it's a really good question. And I also wonder how long that does it take? Will we see something in the genetics? So it's interesting. And yeah.
Like the baobabs we've studied, and they've been there for years and years and years, but they don't have dispersers, and like I don't know how long they're gonna be there. Oh. Well, but the regeneration of the baobab is low though.
Yeah, I guess it depends also on how
yeah.
long do they live, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah. I guess baobabs are really long-lived. I'm not sure. Do they live really long?
They do, yeah.
And these palms that you're studying, Laura, are they? Do we know what the disperser would have been in the past? Is it understood?
Yeah, so they are. Some of them are like suggested that the extinct giant lemurs or like elephant birds were dispersing them. But of course, again, we don't know really. But yeah, so that's what we think. And then we have the small ones which are still being dispersed by the small lemurs, like some of the lemurs as well, that Onja was telling, and birds, of course. But yeah, the big ones are not having any disperse anymore. So let's see what's going to happen with them.
Okay, great. Chad, do you have another question?
Sure, I've got another question. This is maybe a little bit outside what the research you talked about today, at least, but I'm curious about the study system because you have you have very different frugivores in Madagascar than in Africa or really anywhere else because of the lemurs. But you have really the same plant lineages, maybe a lot of endemic plant species, but the same genera and families are in Madagascar as are in Africa or elsewhere in the Paleotropics. So do you have a sense for whether the Madagascar flora has evolved any novel fruit traits in response to the different frugivores that they have in Madagascar?
I'm gonna say I don't know because I'm not sure about the answer on that as well. I don't know about the evolution of the plants in either the mainland Africa or Madagascar, so I cannot give an accurate answer for that, but that would be very interesting to look at, like make some comparison. I know there have been like some research comparing seed dispersals of like the plant species that exist on Madagascar and also the ones that exist on mainland Africa. I can't remember where exactly, but yeah, I'm looking at that, but not in terms, I'm not sure about like in terms of the evolution of plants in both places.
Interesting questions. I imagine elephant birds might have triggered some particular dispersal syndromes, and then also the absence of things like elephants and big mega herbivores must change the traits of the community, recruiting traits. Okay, great. Any more questions? Any final questions? If not, thank you, Onja, for a fascinating talk. And it's really nice to be carried away to Madagascar for an hour as well. We're all missing experience of the tropics, many of us are. I encourage you all to unmute and let's hear some audible applause as well.
Thank you.
Okay, so great, and good luck with setting up your lab and your future research as well. I hope you get back to Madagascar sometime
Thank
soon.
you. Thank you so much.
Okay, and everyone else have a good weekend and do attend future seminars as you like. Okay, goodbye everyone.